The world will never finish itself. Milarepa, endless busyness and the urgency of practice. By the Backyard Buddhist, there's a line from the great Tibetan yogi Milarepa that has haunted me for years. The affairs of the world will go on forever. Do not delay the practice of meditation. The older I get, the more I realize how terrifyingly true that statement really is. Because the world never runs out of reasons to postpone awakening. There's always one more bill. One more argument, one more election cycle, one more war, one more emergency, one more notification, one more thing we absolutely must handle before we finally sit still and look directly into our own minds. And somehow, that later never arrives. I think many of us secretly imagine that spiritual practice will begin once life becomes manageable. We imagine there will come a mythical season when everything settles down. The children will be easier, the finances will stabilize, the anxiety will disappear, the schedule will open up, the body will feel better, the world will calm down. But the world has never calmed down, not once. Empires rose and collapsed during the Buddha's lifetime. Armies marched across Asia while monks meditated in caves. Famines, plagues, corruption and violence have accompanied humanity since the beginning of recorded history. The machinery of samsara has always been loud, and yet awakening has always remained possible. That's the part we often forget. Milarepa knew about chaos. Milarepa wasn't speaking from the comfort of abstraction. His life was brutal. Before becoming one of Tibet's most beloved saints, he committed terrible acts of vengeance through black magic after his family was abused and dispossessed. According to the traditional biographies, people died because of his hatred. Villages suffered because of his rage. He spent years drowning in remorse. When the horror of what he had done finally broke open inside him, he sought out the great teacher Marpa Lotsawa. Marpa didn't immediately comfort him. He broke him down. Milarepa was made to build stone towers by hand, only to tear them down and rebuild them repeatedly. He was humiliated, ignored, exhausted, and psychologically stripped bare. The stories are almost shocking in their severity. But through all of it, Milarepa came to understand something most of us resist with all our strength. The world will never arrange itself into a convenient doorway to liberation. Practice has to happen in the middle of uncertainty, not after uncertainty. We worship busyness. One of the strangest things about modern culture is that exhaustion has become a kind of virtue. People wear burnout like a badge of honor. How have you been? Busy. We say it almost proudly. Constant motion gives us the feeling that we matter. If we stop moving, we might have to confront what's underneath all the activity. We might have to sit quietly long enough to notice the loneliness, fear, grief, anger, confusion, or emptiness we've been outrunning for years. Meditation interrupts that escape route, and that's why it's so difficult. Not because sitting is complicated, but because silence removes anesthesia. The Buddha understood this deeply. In the Dhammapada he says, "The distracted do not realize that we are living in a world where all must die. But those who do realize this settle their quarrels." Dhammapada 6. That's devastatingly direct. Most of human conflict flows from forgetfulness. We live as though we have endless time, endless tomorrows, endless opportunities to become sincere. But we don't. Death is not morbid in Buddhism. One of the great misunderstandings about Buddhism is the assumption that contemplation of death is pessimistic. It isn't. It's clarifying. The Buddha repeatedly encouraged recollection of impermanence because he understood that denial creates delusion. The Tibetan traditions especially emphasized this urgency. Entire systems of practice emerged around contemplating the uncertainty of death and the rarity of human birth. Milarepa himself famously sang, "My religion is not deceiving myself." I love that line because it cuts through so much spiritual theater. Practice is not about pretending to be calm. It's not about performing holiness. It's not about constructing an identity called spiritual person. It's about ceasing to deceive ourselves. And one of the greatest deceptions we maintain is the belief that awakening can wait indefinitely. The laundry never ends. I used to imagine that serious practice belonged to monasteries, mountain caves, or silent retreats. But over time, I've realized that the real monastery is ordinary life itself. The sink full of dishes, the crying child, the stressful commute, the unanswered email, the difficult marriage, the fear about money, the grief we carry quietly in our chest while still going to work every day. This is the monastery, not apart from life, as life. Zen teachers have said this in countless ways. Kodo Sawaki famously referred to Zazen as good for nothing, meaning meditation is not valuable because it helps us get somewhere. It is the direct expression of awakening itself. Likewise, Shunryu Suzuki wrote in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, the most important point is to accept yourself completely. That acceptance does not mean passivity. It means finally ceasing the war against the present moment. And strangely enough, that war is what exhausts us, not life itself. Samsara will happily consume your entire lifetime. There is a frightening momentum to worldly distraction. You look up and 10 years are gone, then 20, then 40. Entire lives disappear into maintenance. And to be clear, Buddhism does not condemn ordinary responsibilities. Feeding your family matters. Paying bills matters. Caring for people matters. Compassion absolutely manifests through ordinary duties. But the problem comes when we lose ourselves completely inside the machinery of endless becoming. The Buddha compared this condition to being swept away in a flood. Modern life intensifies that flood exponentially. Algorithms now compete for our attention every waking second. Entire industries are built around keeping human beings psychologically agitated, distracted, outraged, addicted, frightened, and stimulated. Stillness threatens those systems. A person who can sit quietly and observe their own mind becomes much harder to manipulate. That may be one reason genuine meditation feels quietly rebellious in modern society. There will never be a perfect time. I think this is the real heart of Milarepa's statement. Not guilt, not pressure, not fear. Urgency. Sacred urgency. The recognition that this moment, however imperfect, is our actual life. Not tomorrow, not someday. Now. Right here amid the unfinished dishes and unanswered texts and political chaos and bodily fatigue and uncertainty about the future. The great Zen master Dogen wrote, "Do not squander your life." Every time I read that sentence, it lands differently. Because squandering life doesn't only mean obvious self-destruction. Sometimes it means sleepwalking, living mechanically, remaining perpetually distracted. Never looking deeply into the nature of mind because we're waiting for conditions that never arrive. 5 minutes is enough to begin. I think many people avoid meditation because they imagine it requires perfection. An hour-long session, perfect posture, perfect silence, perfect concentration. But sincerity matters more than performance. Sometimes practice begins with 5 honest minutes. 5 minutes of simply sitting still and noticing the breath. 5 minutes of allowing thoughts to come and go without chasing them. 5 minutes of remembering that we are alive at all. That's already enormous. In Soto Zen especially, there's a deep emphasis on just sitting, shikantaza. Not trying to acquire enlightenment as though it were a product. Not trying to become spiritually impressive. Just sitting directly in reality. Nothing added, nothing removed. The world continues anyway. One of the most humbling realizations meditation gives us is this. The world continues without our constant psychological management. Clouds still move, traffic still flows, people still argue online, governments are still government, markets still fluctuate. The universe does not pause while we sit on a cushion. And oddly enough, that's liberating, because we begin to see how much suffering comes from our compulsive need to mentally grip everything. Meditation loosens the fist, not by force, but by insight. A final reflection by the backyard Buddhist. In my own way of thinking, I think Milarepa's warning is ultimately an act of compassion. He is reminding us not to trade our entire lives for distraction, not to postpone intimacy with reality itself, not to become so hypnotized by the noise of samsara that we forget the possibility of awakening altogether. To relate to a phenomena seen in the South, in Cartersville, Georgia, there's a man who has a small van with flyers and a large wooden signboard that he wears while sitting on a median on Highway 41. The sign says, "It's later than you think. Repent." This is, of course, a Christian phenomena, but the message is clear. The hour is later than you think. Be about the business of zazen. Be about the business of letting go and finding your true face. The affairs of the world truly will go on forever. There will always be another crisis. Another headline, another obligation, another reason to delay. But eventually this life will end. And when it does, I doubt many of us will wish we had spent more time refreshing notifications or worrying about things we could never control anyway. We will wish we had been present. We will wish we had loved more deeply. We will wish we had awakened more fully to the preciousness of simply being here. So perhaps the real question isn't whether the world is too busy for practice. Perhaps the question is, if not now, when?